A billionaire stepped out of his luxury car to inspect a demolition site, then froze. A little girl sat alone in the rubble of her destroyed home, clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit. Her trembling voice asked one simple question, a question that would shatter his world and change both their lives forever. The late afternoon sun burned down over the empty lot on Ashrow District's west side. Concrete dust floated in the air like pale smoke. Callan Mercer stepped out of his black Range Rover and adjusted his sunglasses, the polished leather of his shoes crunching against broken plaster and splintered wood. Behind him, the vehicle's engine hummed quietly, the air conditioning still running for his driver. A small symbol of power, one he barely noticed anymore. Mr. Mercer, the construction supervisor, hurried toward him, clutching a clipboard. Demolition finished yesterday. Cleanup crews will begin hauling debris in a few hours. Callan nodded without looking at him. His sharp eyes moved across the property. Where a row of modest homes had once stood there was now nothing but rubble, shattered bricks, twisted pipes, abandoned furniture, and fragments of lives people hadn't managed to carry away. Soon, it would become the newest Mercer Market flagship store, the 20th location in his growing retail empire. Projected returns exceed expectations, the supervisor added eagerly, about 16% above forecast. Callan allowed himself the faintest smile. Numbers going up. Charts climbing higher, expansion continuing exactly as planned. That was what mattered. He checked his watch. 2 hours until his investor meeting. Enough time for a quick walk around the property. "I'll take a look around," Callan said calmly. The supervisor nodded. "Watch your step, sir. Some areas haven't been cleared yet." Callan moved through the debris field alone, stepping over broken walls and scattered belongings. He pulled his phone from his pocket, preparing to photograph the site for his presentation. That was when he heard it. A sound so soft it almost disappeared beneath the distant roar of machinery. A child crying. Callan frowned. Slowly he lowered his phone. The sound came again. Thin. Fragile. He walked toward it, rounding the corner of what had once been the front wall of a small house. And then he saw her. A little girl sat on a faded pink suitcase in the middle of the rubble. She couldn't have been older than 6. Dust clung to her pale blonde hair. Her small yellow dress was stained gray with dirt. In her arms, she held a worn, stuffed rabbit so tightly its fabric ears were twisted in her fists. Her blue eyes were full of tears. Behind her lay the broken remains of a home. Callan Mercer stopped walking. For the first time that day, the powerful billionaire had absolutely no idea what to do. Callan hesitated. Children weren't his territory. He had a daughter, of course, Elodie, 6 years old. But Elodie lived between private tutors, nannies, and scheduled weekends with her mother. Their lives intersected in short, carefully managed moments. Callan Mercer negotiated billion-dollar deals with ease, but standing 10 feet away from a crying child felt strangely difficult. "Hey," he said finally. The girl looked up. Her wide blue eyes blinked through streaks of dust and tears. "You shouldn't be here," Callan added awkwardly. "This place isn't safe." She didn't move. She only hugged the stuffed rabbit tighter. "Where are your parents?" he asked, glancing around the empty lot. For a moment she said nothing. Then she sniffed and wiped her nose against her sleeve. "My mom went to find us somewhere to stay." Her voice was small but steady. "She told me to wait here with our things." Callan looked down. The suitcase, the rabbit. That was all. Everything the girl owned in the world. "What's your name?" he asked. "Wren," she answered softly. Callan repeated it under his breath. "Wren." She nodded. A tear slid down her cheek. "Why are you crying, Wren?" The little girl lifted one trembling finger and pointed behind her. "At the ruins of the house. They broke it yesterday," she whispered. Callan followed her gesture. He suddenly recognized the address, one of the final demolitions completed before construction could begin. "This house," he said slowly. Was it yours? Wren nodded. Fresh tears filled her eyes. We didn't have enough money, she said simply. Callan felt something tighten deep in his chest. A strange pressure. He had seen thousands of properties like this, but never the child who slept inside them. Callan sat down on a chunk of broken concrete across from the girl. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The wind moved gently through the empty lot, lifting loose papers and scraps of insulation like ghostly feathers. Callan checked his watch. 1 hour and 40 minutes until his investor meeting. Do you know when your mom will be back? He asked. Wren shook her head. She said soon. Then she added quietly, but she might take a while. Why? The girl looked down at her rabbit. Because we have to find somewhere we can live. The simplicity of the sentence hit him harder than he expected. Callan Mercer had built an empire by making decisions quickly and without emotion. Yet sitting there across from a 6-year-old girl with dusty hair and a broken home behind her, something unfamiliar was happening inside him. Discomfort. No. Something deeper. Guilt. I can stay here for a little while, he said, suddenly surprising even himself, until your mom comes back. Wren nodded politely. They sat in silence. Minutes passed. Then the girl looked up at him curiously. Do you work here? Callan hesitated. Yes, sort of. She thought about that. Then she asked a question so innocent it cut straight through him. Did you tell them to break our house? The world seemed to go quiet. Callan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because the answer was yes, Callan never answered Wren's question. Instead, he stood slowly brushing the gray dust from his tailored trousers. I have to go, he said quietly. Wren looked up at him with wide blue eyes. Okay, she replied softly. Then she added something that made his chest tighten. Buddy and I are used to waiting. Callan hesitated. For a moment he considered staying longer. But the familiar rhythm of his world was already pulling him back. Meetings, investors, contracts, expansion plans, responsibilities. At least that was what he told himself. You'll stay right here until your mom comes back, he asked. Wren nodded obediently. She said not to move. Callan forced a polite smile. Good, that's smart. He turned and began walking back toward his car. Each step across the rubble felt heavier than the last. When he reached the edge of the site, he glanced back one final time. The image froze in his mind. The little blonde girl sitting alone on a suitcase, surrounded by the broken remains of her life, holding her stuffed rabbit like it was the last safe thing in the world. Callan slid into the back seat of his Range Rover. Where to, sir? The driver asked. Callan stared out the window for several seconds. His voice came out quieter than usual. Downtown. The car pulled away from the demolition site. But Wren Holloway didn't leave his mind. Not during the drive. Not during the meeting. Not even later that night when he walked into the silent marble halls of his mansion. The Mercer mansion was quiet. Too quiet. 30,000 square feet of polished marble floors and perfectly arranged furniture echoed with a strange emptiness. Callan loosened his tie as he climbed the staircase. Did Elodie have dinner? He asked the housekeeper passing in the hallway. Yes, Mr. Mercer, she replied. She's in her room playing. She asked if you would join her, but it was getting late. Callan nodded slowly. He walked down the long corridor and stopped in front of his daughter's bedroom door. For a moment, he simply stood there. Then he knocked and entered. The room looked like something from a storybook. Soft pink walls, shelves filled with pristine toys, a 2-story dollhouse bigger than some apartments. On the bed sat Elodie Mercer, her golden curls bouncing as she played with a small collection of plush animals. When she saw him, her face lit up instantly. Dad. She ran across the room and threw her arms around him. Callan lifted her, surprised again by how big she had grown. How was school today, Princess? He asked. Elodie began talking excitedly about her class, her friends, and the science project they had started. Callan listened, but part of his mind drifted somewhere else. To a dusty yellow dress, to tear-streaked blue eyes, to a little girl sitting on a pink suitcase. Elodie had more toys than she could ever play with. Wren had a rabbit. Elodie had a room larger than the house that once stood in Ashrow district. Wren had rubble. Dad Elodie's voice snapped him back. "You're looking at me funny." Callan blinked. "Am I?" She nodded thoughtfully. "You're here, but you're also somewhere else." Children noticed everything. Callan forced a small smile. "I met a little girl today." Elodie's eyes brightened. "Really? Is she nice?" Callan hesitated. "I think she is. Can she come play with me?" The innocent question hit him harder than anything Wren had said earlier, because he knew the truth. Those two girls lived in completely different worlds. Worlds he had helped create. 3 days passed. 3 long days. Callan Mercer attended meetings, signed contracts, approved budgets, but his mind kept returning to the same image, a small girl sitting in the dust. By the 4th morning, the memory had become impossible to ignore. He canceled 2 appointments and called his driver. "Take me to Ashrow District." The car stopped several blocks away from the demolition site. "I'll walk from here," Callan said. He wandered through streets he had never truly noticed before. Small grocery stores, old brick buildings, people rushing between jobs. It was a completely different world from the glass towers where he spent most of his life. Callan didn't know exactly what he was looking for. But deep down, he did. 20 minutes later, he saw her. Wren Holloway sat on the cracked steps of an aging apartment building. The same yellow dress, the same stuffed rabbit. She was alone again. Callan stepped closer, holding a small paper bag from a diner. Inside was a sandwich and an orange juice. "Hi," he said carefully. Wren looked up. Recognition slowly appeared in her eyes. "You're the man from the broken houses," she said. Callan winced slightly at the description. "Yes." He held out the bag. "Are you hungry?" Wren stared at the food. Her eyes lit up, but she didn't take it. "My mom says I'm not supposed to take things from strangers." Callan nodded respectfully. "Your mom is right." He set the bag beside her on the step. "I'll leave it here." Wren waited until he stepped back before grabbing the sandwich eagerly. She took several bites, then carefully tucked part of it into her pocket. Callan noticed. Saving that, she nodded proudly. "For my mom." A 6-year-old child saving food for someone else. Callan Mercer felt something shift inside his chest, something deeper than guilt, something that might change everything. Wren finished the last bite of the sandwich slowly, not because she wasn't hungry, but because she was saving the final pieces in her pocket. "For my mom," she had said. Callan Mercer had never seen anything like it. He sat on the lower step of the building watching the girl swing her small legs as she drank the orange juice carefully, trying not to spill a drop. They talked a little. Wren told him about the kindergarten she used to attend before the demolition, about the friend she missed, about how her mother always read bedtime stories even when she was tired. Callan found himself listening more intently than he did during million-dollar negotiations. Then suddenly footsteps echoed from inside the building. Fast, urgent. Wren, a woman's voice, sharp with fear. The door burst open and a young woman rushed outside. She couldn't have been older than 30. Her blonde hair was tied loosely behind her head, strands escaping in messy curls. Her jeans were worn, her jacket thin against the cold wind. Her eyes immediately locked onto the little girl. Relief flooded her face. Then she saw Callan. The relief vanished, instantly replaced with suspicion. She stepped between him and Wren, pulling her daughter close. "Who are you?" she demanded. Wren looked up brightly. Mommy, this is the man from the broken houses. Callan winced slightly. The woman's eyes hardened. What do you want with my daughter? Callan stood slowly. I was just bringing her some food. The woman glanced at the empty sandwich wrapper, then back at him. Her expression said she didn't believe a single word. Are you from social services? The woman asked sharply. Callan shook his head. No. Then why are you here? Her voice carried the protective tension of someone who had learned to trust no one. Wren tugged on her sleeve. Mom, he has a daughter too. Her name is Elodie. She has a stuffed horse. The woman looked down briefly at her daughter, then back at Callan. My name is Ivy Holloway, she said cautiously. Callan Mercer. For a moment neither moved. Then she shook his hand quickly, almost reluctantly. You work with the construction company that tore down our house, don't you? The question hit him harder than expected. Callan hesitated. I have connections to the project. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Ivy gave a bitter laugh. Of course you do. She crossed her arms. You rich developers always show up afterward pretending to care. The words landed like a slap. Callan didn't argue, because deep down he knew she wasn't entirely wrong. I found Wren the day the houses were demolished, he said quietly. She was alone in the rubble. Ivy's jaw tightened. I told her to stay there while I looked for help. Her voice softened slightly as she looked at her daughter, then hardened again when she faced Callan. We're fine now, she said firmly. We'll figure things out. Callan nodded respectfully. I believe you will. The conversation ended there. An awkward silence settled between them. Callan turned to leave, but just as he reached the sidewalk, a small voice stopped him. Callan. He turned. Wren stood beside her mother, clutching the stuffed rabbit. Will you come back and read me a story one day? Ivy looked uncomfortable. Callan hesitated. That's up to your mom, he said gently. Ivy didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. 2 weeks passed. Callan visited Wren a few more times, always carefully, always respectfully. A snack, a small book, colored pencils. Ivy never encouraged the visits, but she stopped sending him away. It was an uneasy truce. Then one evening, the storm came. Rain crashed against the glass walls of Callan's office on the 30th floor. Lightning split the sky over Brindle Point. Callan tried to focus on a development contract in front of him, but his mind kept drifting. To a tiny boarding room, to thin walls, to a little girl who owned one suitcase and a stuffed rabbit. Finally, he slammed the folder shut. This is ridiculous, he muttered. It wasn't his responsibility. He had already helped more than most people would. But 15 minutes later, he was driving through the rain. The streets were nearly empty. Water flooded the gutters. Wind pushed the rain sideways. When he reached the building where Ivy and Wren had been staying, he slowed the car, and then he saw them. Across the street, under a narrow store awning. Ivy sat on the pavement with Wren pressed against her chest. Both of them soaked, shivering violently. Callan slammed the car door and ran through the rain. She looked up, her face pale with exhaustion. They kicked everyone out, she said weakly. City inspection. The building isn't safe anymore. Thunder cracked overhead. Wren clutched her rabbit. Buddy is cold, she whispered. Callan looked around the empty street, then back at them, and made a decision that would change all their lives. Come with me, he said. Just for tonight. Rain hammered the windshield so hard, it sounded like gravel. The city lights of Brindle Point blurred through the storm as Callan Mercer drove through flooded streets, the wipers struggling to keep up. In the back seat, Wren sat wrapped inside Ivy's thin jacket, her small hands clutching the soaked stuffed rabbit. Her lips were still blue from the cold. Callan glanced at them through the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt something he couldn't control. Urgency. 10 minutes later, the car rolled into the underground garage of a modest apartment building downtown. Not his mansion, not one of his luxury penthouses, just an investment property he rarely used. A place meant to sit empty while its value slowly increased. Tonight it would finally serve a purpose. Callan led them upstairs to the 5th floor. The apartment was simple but clean: 2 bedrooms, a small living room, and a kitchen. Warm light filled the space. Dry. Safe. He opened the door. "You can stay here tonight," he said quietly. Ivy stood in the doorway, hesitation written across her face. Every instinct told her not to trust a wealthy stranger, but thunder shook the windows behind them. Wren shivered violently. "Just for tonight," Callan added gently. Ivy finally nodded. "Thank you." The words were quiet, almost reluctant. Inside, Callan found towels and a hairdryer. Soon, Wren emerged from the bathroom wearing one of Callan's oversized t-shirts like a dress. Her rabbit had been carefully dried and placed beside her. She smiled shyly. "Buddy feels better." Callan felt something tighten in his chest. He turned toward the kitchen. "I'll make something to eat." He wasn't a man who cooked often, but within minutes he had water boiling for pasta. Nothing fancy, just something warm. The 3 of them ate quietly at the small kitchen table. Wren devoured the food like it was the best meal she had ever tasted. Ivy ate slower, watching Callan carefully, still unsure, still guarded. But something in her expression had softened. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside that small apartment, 3 lives had quietly collided, and none of them knew yet how much everything was about to change. Wren fell asleep quickly. Exhaustion had claimed her the moment her head touched the pillow in the master bedroom. Callan left the door slightly open so Ivy could check on her. Then he returned to the living room. Rain still pounded against the windows. The storm showed no sign of ending. Ivy stepped into the room a few minutes later. She looked different now. Dry clothes, hair loosely tied back, still tired but calmer. "She's asleep," Ivy said quietly. Callan nodded. She needed it. For a moment neither spoke. Then Ivy crossed her arms. "Why are you doing this?" The question hung heavily in the air. "What do you mean?" Callan asked. "You know exactly what I mean." Her voice wasn't angry, just wary. "You barely know us," she continued. "You found my daughter sitting in rubble, and now suddenly you're rescuing us from storms and feeding us dinner." Callan leaned against the kitchen counter. The truth was uncomfortable. "Because I care about her." "And me?" Ivy asked. Callan hesitated. "Yes." Ivy studied him carefully. People had lied to her before, landlords, employers, bank officers. But Callan's voice carried something different, something raw. "You work with the company that demolished our house," she said quietly. Callan swallowed. "Yes, it wasn't the full truth, but it was close enough to hurt." Ivy sighed and looked down at the floor. "We had that house for 6 years," she said softly. "It wasn't much, but it was ours." Her voice trembled slightly. "After my husband died, it was the only place that still felt like home." Callan said nothing, because every word felt like another stone being added to the weight already inside him. "You know what the worst part was?" she continued. "They didn't even look at us. The developers. The people making the decisions. To them, we were just paperwork." She looked up at him. 2 tired blue eyes filled with quiet pain. "Just numbers." Callan closed his eyes for a moment, because she had no idea how painfully accurate that statement really was. 3 days later, Ivy and Wren moved into a small rented room nearby. Ivy had found temporary work at a diner. The pay was barely enough to survive, but she refused to stay longer in Callan's apartment. "I need to do this myself," she told him. Callan respected that, but he didn't disappear. He began visiting Wren occasionally. A book, a snack, sometimes colored pencils. Slowly, Ivy stopped seeing him as a threat. Then one morning during breakfast, something unexpected happened. Dad, Elodie said suddenly. Callan looked up from his coffee. Yes, Princess, can I meet Ren? Callan froze. Elodie had been hearing about the little girl for weeks. Why do you want to meet her? He asked carefully. Elodie shrugged. She sounds like me. Callan almost laughed. In some ways she did. Both girls were 6. Both had bright blue eyes. Both loved stuffed animals. But their lives were separated by a canyon of privilege. Elodie, Callan said gently. Ren's life is a little different. That's okay. His daughter said it with such simple certainty it caught him off guard. I can share my toys. The innocence of that offer struck him deeply. Later that afternoon, Callan visited the boarding house. Ren was sitting on the floor drawing. Her face lit up when she saw him. Callan, she ran forward and hugged his legs, a new habit she had developed recently. I brought someone next time, he said carefully. My daughter. Ren's eyes widened. Really, she has a stuffed horse, Callan added. Ren gasped dramatically. Buddy has never met a horse before. For the first time in weeks, Callan Mercer laughed. But deep inside, he also knew something else. When those two girls finally met, it would change everything. Sunday afternoon arrived wrapped in soft gray clouds and a thin autumn wind that moved through Brindle Point like a whispered warning. Callan Mercer parked outside the old boarding house with one hand tight on the steering wheel. In the back seat, Elodie sat holding a neatly wrapped package on her lap, her small knees bouncing with nervous energy. Do you think she'll like it? She asked for the 5th time. Callan looked at her in the mirror. I think she'll love it. Inside the package was Starlight Elodie's favorite plush horse after years of bedtime adventures, tea parties, and whispered secrets. She had insisted on giving it to Ren, not lending it, giving it. She needs a horse, Elodie had declared, with the simple certainty only children possess. Now climbing the narrow staircase to Ivy and Ren's rented room, that confidence faded. Elodie reached for her father's hand and held it tightly. Ivy opened the door before they knocked. She had clearly made an effort for the visit. Her hair was tied back neatly. Her blouse was clean and pressed, though old. There was still caution in her face, but less hostility than before. Beside her stood Ren. For one suspended second, the world seemed to hold its breath. The two girls stared at each other. Same age, same pale blonde hair, same luminous blue eyes. If someone had passed them on the street, they might have believed they were sisters. Hi, Elodie said softly. Hi, Ren answered. Then Ren's eyes dropped to the package in Elodie's arms. Is that the horse? Elodie nodded and stepped forward. This is Starlight, she said carefully. She used to be my best friend, but I think maybe she wants to be yours now too. Ren took the package like it was made of glass. She opened it with slow, reverent fingers. When she saw the white plush horse with the silver star stitched on its forehead, her mouth fell open. She's beautiful, Ren whispered. Then she hugged it to her chest so tightly that Callan had to look away for a moment. Do you want to meet Buddy, Ren? Asked eagerly. Elodie's whole face brightened. Yes. And just like that, the shyness vanished. Ren grabbed Elodie's hand and pulled her inside the room. Within seconds, their laughter floated into the hallway, bright, breathless, immediate. Two little girls talking over each other, already sharing their imaginary worlds, as if they had known one another forever. Callan stood just outside the doorway, stunned by how quickly the distance disappeared. Behind him, Ivy folded her arms loosely and watched the girls with something fragile in her expression. They really do look alike, she said quietly. Callan nodded. Yes. But he was thinking something deeper. One little girl had grown up in silk sheets, surrounded by comfort. The other had learned how to save half a sandwich for her mother. And somehow neither of them hesitated. Neither questioned the difference. Children so often walked straight into the truth, adults complicated. And the truth was this: the moment Elodie and Wren met, something irreversible began. Not just for them, for all of them. The girls vanished into Wren's small room with Starlight and Buddy and a storm of excited voices. Soon came the sounds of chairs dragging across the floor, blankets being tugged, giggles erupting. "They're building something," Ivy said, glancing toward the room. Callan almost smiled. "With those two, probably a kingdom." A minute later, Elodie called from the bedroom. "We're making a fort," Wren added proudly. "It's for explorers and princesses and horses and rabbits." Ivy exhaled through her nose, the closest thing to a laugh Callan had heard from her in weeks. Together they stepped into the tiny room and found the girls struggling to drape a sheet between the bedframe and a chair that was clearly losing the fight. "Need help?" Callan asked. "Only a little," Wren said with enormous dignity. So the adults helped. For 20 minutes the room transformed. A patched-together fort rose from chairs, blankets, pillows, and one faded lamp pushed carefully aside. Elodie crawled inside first with the flashlight she had brought from home. Wren followed, carrying Starlight under one arm and Buddy under the other. "It's perfect," Elodie gasped. "No," Wren corrected softly. "It's magic." Callan stepped back. The little fort glowed from within like a tiny lantern in a dark world. The girls arranged cookies, juice boxes, crayons, and stuffed animals, as if preparing for a grand expedition. Then they disappeared into their whispering universe. Ivy motioned toward the kitchen. "Coffee." It was the first time she had offered him anything. Callan followed her quietly. The kitchen was small enough that if both of them turned at once, they might bump shoulders. Ivy filled an old kettle and set it on the stove. No polished marble counters, no designer appliances, just worn cabinets, chipped paint, and the quiet hum of survival. Still, something about it felt more real than his mansion ever had. They sat at the little table with mismatched mugs between their hands. For a few minutes, they only listened to the girls laughing in the next room. Then Ivy spoke. "Wren hasn't smiled like this in a long time." Callan looked down at his coffee. "Elodie either," he admitted. Ivy studied him for a moment. "You love your daughter." It wasn't a question. Callan nodded. "I do." But that single word caught him off guard. He gave a tired smile. "But I've spent too much of my life acting like providing for her was the same thing as being there." Ivy lowered her gaze to the steam rising from her cup. "Some people have to choose between money and time," she said quietly. "Some people don't realize they had the choice until it's too late." The words lingered between them. Then the girls came running out, breathless and glowing. Mom Wren cried. "Elodie knows how to braid hair, and Wren knows how to draw warrior princesses," Elodie added. "Real ones, not the silly kind." Callan and Ivy exchanged a look neither fully understood, because something strange was happening in that small room. Not romance, not peace, not yet, but the first fragile shape of trust. And as the girls ran back to their fort, laughter trailing behind them like light, Ivy grew quiet again. Her face changed. The softness faded into something heavier. Like a door inside her had opened a crack, and behind it stood grief waiting. The laughter from the bedroom softened into murmurs. The girls were deep inside their game, now telling stories beneath blankets and flashlight shadows. In the kitchen, the light above the stove hummed faintly. Ivy wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, as if drawing warmth from it. Callan sensed the shift before she spoke. "There's something I never told you," she said. He didn't interrupt. "My husband's name was Silas Holloway." Callan remained still. The name meant nothing to him yet. But the pain in her voice did. "We met in college," Ivy continued. "He studied engineering. I studied business for a while before I dropped out and started working." A faint smile touched her mouth and vanished just as quickly. "He was the kind of man who always believed the truth mattered, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was dangerous." Callan listened silent. When Wren was 3, Silas was working for a construction firm. He found structural problems in one of the projects. Serious ones. He wrote reports. He warned supervisors. He pushed and pushed because he thought that if people knew, they would do the right thing. She gave a hollow laugh. They didn't. The room seemed smaller now, the air heavier. They fired him, Ivy said. Quietly, efficiently, no scandal, no investigation, just gone. And after that, nobody else in the industry would touch him. Callan felt a faint unease begin to stir. Ivy kept going, her voice low and steady in that dangerous way grief sometimes becomes. He drove rideshare, took odd jobs, barely slept, barely ate. One night he fell asleep at the wheel. She stopped. For a second, Callan thought she might not continue. Then she did. He died before the ambulance reached the hospital. The words dropped between them like stones. In the next room, Wren laughed at something Elodie said. The sound was almost unbearable. Callan looked down, jaw tight. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Ivy nodded, but she was no longer looking at him. "I was left with debt. Medical bills, loans, a child who needed everything." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "I tried to keep the house. Then we lost the house and rented something smaller. Then that building was sold." Callan's heartbeat slowed, then sharpened. "And the company that bought the property," she said, finally lifting her eyes to his, "was Mercer Development." Every muscle in his body went still. He knew the project. He knew the file. He knew the signatures. His signatures. Ivy continued, unaware of the full storm now tearing through him. "They gave us 30 days. I begged for more time. No one listened. The morning after the deadline, the machines were already there." Her voice broke for the first time. "I barely got Wren's clothes and documents out before they tore the place apart." Callan couldn't breathe properly, because now the truth was standing between them in full shape. Not vague, not abstract, not corporate. Personal. He was not merely connected to the men who had done this. He was the man behind them. And in the next room, under a blanket, fort made of borrowed joy, his daughter was laughing with the little girl whose life he had helped destroy. Callan stared at Ivy, his throat tightening around words that had suddenly become unavoidable. Because there was only one truth left to speak, and once he spoke it, everything would shatter. The small kitchen suddenly felt suffocating. The hum of the overhead light seemed louder than before. Callan Mercer sat motionless at the table, Ivy's words echoing in his mind like a slow, crushing avalanche. Mercer Development? 30 days? The machines already there the next morning. Every detail she had spoken matched a project file he remembered too well. Ashrow District Redevelopment Phase 1. Callan had signed the approvals himself. Back then, it had been just another report in a stack of dozens. Another property acquisition, another redevelopment plan, another set of numbers on a spreadsheet promising growth. But now the consequences were sitting across from him. Not a statistic. Not a financial projection. A woman whose husband was dead. A little girl who had watched her home collapse. Callan swallowed hard. "Ivy." His voice came out lower than usual. She looked up, noticing something different in his expression. Something strained, something almost frightened. "What is it?" she asked carefully. Callan stared at the table for several seconds. Inside the other room, Elodie and Wren burst into laughter again, the sound drifting into the kitchen like sunlight through broken glass. The contrast made his chest tighten painfully. "I need to tell you something," he said. Ivy's eyes narrowed slightly. About the demolition, silence spread across the room. Callan lifted his head slowly. "You asked earlier if I worked with the company responsible?" "Yes," she said. "I remember." Callan exhaled. "I told you I had connections to the project." A pause. That wasn't the whole truth. Ivy didn't move. The air between them thickened. "What do you mean?" she asked. Callan felt his heart pounding harder now, because there was no way to soften what came next. "I don't just work with the company." He forced the words out. "I own it." The sentence landed like a hammer. For several seconds, Ivy simply stared at him, as if her mind refused to process the meaning. Then she blinked. "What Mercer Development?" Callan said quietly. "It's mine." Her chair scraped loudly across the floor as she stood. "No." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "That's not possible." Callan didn't move. "I was at the site that day because I was inspecting the project." The color drained slowly from Ivy's face. "You knew," she said. Her voice began trembling. "You knew who we were." "At first I didn't," Callan said quickly. "But after you told me about the house—" "Yes." "And you said nothing." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Callan had no defense. Because the worst part was that she was right. Ivy stepped back as if the floor beneath her had suddenly shifted. "You let my daughter hug you," she said. Her voice was shaking now. "You came into our lives. You brought your daughter here. You let our girls become friends." Each word grew sharper. "All while knowing it was you who destroyed our home." Callan stood slowly. "I didn't understand everything at first, don't." The word cut through the room like glass. "Don't you dare try to explain it away." Her eyes were burning now. "You felt guilty," she said bitterly. "That's it, isn't it?" Callan opened his mouth, but the truth was complicated. At first, yes. But then something had changed. Something real. "I care about Ren," he said. "And about you." Ivy laughed. The sound was hollow and broken. "You care about us." Her hands trembled as she pointed toward the bedroom. "My daughter lost her father. She lost her home. She spent weeks sleeping in borrowed rooms, and the man responsible for all of it walks in pretending to be her friend." Callan felt the words like blows. "I never meant for any of that to happen." "Of course you didn't," Ivy snapped. "Because people like you never see the people you destroy." At that moment, the bedroom door creaked open. Two small figures appeared in the hallway. Ren and Elodie stood side by side, clutching their stuffed animals. Their eyes were wide with confusion. Mom Ren asked softly. "Why are you yelling?" Ivy immediately wiped her face and knelt beside her daughter. "Sweetheart." But Ren looked past her, at Callan. "Are you leaving?" she asked. The innocence in her voice shattered something inside him. Before he could answer, Ivy spoke firmly. "Yes." Her hand rested protectively on Ren's shoulder. "Mr. Mercer and Elodie are leaving now." "But we didn't finish the fort," Ren protested quietly. Elodie's eyes filled with tears. Dad Callan's throat tightened. He crouched beside his daughter. "We have to go, Princess." "But why?" Elodie whispered. Callan glanced toward Ivy. Her expression had turned to stone. "Sometimes adults make mistakes," he said softly. "And sometimes those mistakes hurt people." Ren stepped forward. Her small voice trembled. "Will you come back?" Ivy closed her eyes briefly. "No," she said. And the word ended everything. The girls stood frozen in the hallway. Even at 6 years old, they could feel something terrible had happened. The room that had been filled with laughter minutes earlier now felt heavy and silent. "Wait," Ren said suddenly. She ran back into the bedroom and returned holding Starlight, the plush horse Elodie had given her. She held it out. "You can take her back." Elodie shook her head quickly. "No." "But Mom says you can't come here anymore," Ren whispered. "That doesn't mean you can't keep her." The two girls hugged each other tightly, their small arms wrapped around shoulders that had only just discovered friendship. "Promise you won't forget me," Elodie said. Ren nodded. "I won't. I promise." Callan watched from the doorway. Every instinct inside him screamed that this was wrong. that two innocent children shouldn't be paying for the mistakes of adults. But he had no right to argue. Not now. Not after the truth. "Come on, Elodie," he said gently. Reluctantly, she released Ren and took his hand. As they stepped into the hallway, Ren clutched Starlight and Buddy against her chest. Her blue eyes followed them, confused, hurt. The door closed softly behind them. Outside, the cold wind of late autumn cut through the street. Inside the car, Elodie cried quietly in the back seat. "Why did we have to leave?" Callan looked at her through the rearview mirror. "Because I made a mistake," he said. "What kind of mistake?" He took a long breath. "The kind that changes people's lives." Elodie wiped her eyes. Then she said something that stopped his heart for a moment. "You can fix mistakes." Callan shook his head slowly. "Not always." Elodie stared out the window. "Yes, you can," she whispered. "When I break something, you tell me to make it right." Callan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Her words followed him through the dark streets of Brindle Point. Make it right. For the first time in his life, Callan Mercer began thinking not about profit, not about growth, but about redemption. Because somewhere in the city, a little girl was holding a stuffed horse in a small rented room, and the man who had destroyed her home was the only one who could begin to repair what had been broken. 2 weeks passed after the night everything fell apart. 2 long weeks of silence. Callan Mercer tried calling Ivy, no answer. He sent messages. Nothing. He even wrote a handwritten letter apologizing something he had never done in his life. Still no reply. The Mercer mansion, once a place of quiet luxury, now felt unbearably empty. Every hallway echoed. Every room reminded him of something he had lost. But the worst part was watching Elodie. His once cheerful 6-year-old daughter had grown quiet. Her drawings, once filled with castles and bright skies, now showed lonely stick figures standing far apart. Every morning she asked the same question. "Can we see Ren today?" And every morning, Callan had to say no. One Saturday morning, Elodie sat at the kitchen table staring at her pancakes. "Dad," she asked softly. "Yes, Princess, what mistake did you make?" Callan felt his chest tighten. "You said Rachel is mad because of something you did." He sighed. "Children saw everything." "Remember how Ren lost her house?" he asked gently. Elodie nodded. "Well, the company that made them leave. That was my company." Her fork stopped moving. "You took their house," Callan swallowed. "I didn't know them at the time. But yes, I was responsible." Elodie looked down for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "That wasn't very nice." "No," Callan admitted. "It wasn't." Elodie thought for a moment longer. Then she looked up with simple certainty. "You should fix it," Callan blinked. "Fix it?" "Yes." She shrugged. "When I break something, you tell me to make it right." The words followed him the entire day. Make it right. That afternoon, Callan Mercer walked into his office at Mercer Development and called his lawyer. "Graham," he said calmly, "I want to restructure the company." His lawyer frowned. What kind of restructure? Callan looked out over the city skyline. The kind that stops destroying lives. Within a month, Mercer Development began to change. The first announcement shocked the entire board of directors. A new division would be created, Mercer Community Housing. Its purpose was simple: affordable homes. Priority given to families displaced by Mercer projects in the past. The second decision was even more surprising. Callan created a foundation to assist families struggling after redevelopment, job placement, temporary housing, education support. Millions of dollars flowed into the initiative. His lawyer shook his head one afternoon. "Callan, this will cost you a fortune." Callan didn't hesitate. "I have more than enough." But one decision remained personal, quiet, private. He prepared the documents carefully before driving to Ivy's workplace. She now worked as an administrative assistant at a small accounting office downtown. When she stepped outside that evening and saw him waiting on the sidewalk, she stopped immediately. Her expression was cautious. "What do you want, Cal, in 5 minutes?" he said. "That's all I'm asking." She checked the time. 5. They walked to a small park nearby. Callan handed her an envelope. She didn't take it immediately. "What is this A scholarship?" Her eyes narrowed. "For Ren." Ivy finally opened the envelope. Inside were documents confirming full tuition at Westwood Academy, one of the best private schools in Brindle Point. Every expense covered. Books, uniforms, activities, until graduation. "You're trying to buy forgiveness," she said quietly. Callan shook his head. "No, I'm trying to do what should have been done long ago. There are no conditions. You don't have to forgive me. You don't have to let me back into your lives. This is for Ren." Ivy stared at the papers for a long time. Then she folded them slowly. "I need to think." Callan nodded. "That's fair." He stood up to leave, but before he walked away, Ivy spoke again. "I still don't forgive you." Callan met her eyes calmly. "I understand." 3 weeks later, he received a short message. 4 simple words. "Ren starts Monday." The first day of school arrived with clear skies and the soft warmth of early spring. Callan parked outside Westwood Academy and stepped out of the car beside Elodie. Students and parents filled the courtyard with morning chatter. Suddenly, Elodie grabbed his hand. "Dad." He followed her gaze. Standing near the entrance was a little girl wearing the navy blue Westwood uniform. Her blonde hair was braided neatly down her back. Beside her stood Ivy. "Ren." Elodie didn't hesitate. She ran across the courtyard. "Ren." The two girls collided in a tight hug, laughing and talking all at once, as if the months apart had never existed. Callan remained where he was. He didn't want to push. Didn't want to assume anything had changed. Across the courtyard, Ivy looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. Then Callan simply nodded. A quiet gesture of acknowledgement. Ivy returned it. Not with warmth, not yet, but without anger. And for now, that was enough. The girls were already planning something excitedly. Elodie pointed toward the playground. Ren nodded eagerly. Within seconds, they were running off together again. Callan watched them go. 2 little girls who had started as strangers in completely different worlds. Now inseparable. A reminder of everything he had nearly destroyed, and everything he was trying to rebuild. Behind him, the city of Brindle Point continued its restless motion. Construction cranes, glass towers, endless expansion. But Callan Mercer now understood something he had ignored for years. Buildings weren't the only things a man could create. He could build opportunity. He could build fairness. He could build second chances. And sometimes, if he was brave enough, he could even rebuild himself. Across the playground, Ren and Elodie laughed again. And this time, the sound didn't hurt. It felt like hope. Did this story move your soul? Share your feelings in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, then tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Click the end screen to watch another heartfelt video. See you in the next story.